For the last 11 or so years, a startup called NextVR has been developing proprietary cameras and building the right partnerships. Also, it could bring live and on-demand music and sports events to your VR headset of choice, but that all ended recently. 9to5Mac reported this past April that Apple had acquired the company in a deal valued at around $100 million, and Apple recently confirmed that acquisition, if not the price, to Bloomberg. And just to seal the deal, NextVR shut down its website, which now only thanks people for basically joining them for the ride, and mentions that NextVR is headed in a new direction. So that begs the question, what is Apple going to do with a VR company? The short, obvious answer is no one knows for sure, but with all of this news still in our rearview mirror, this seems like a pretty good time to take stock of Apple's interest in VR and see what that tells us. Historically, Apple hasn't done a whole lot with VR. I think the most public embrace I remember was back at WWDC 2017, when Craig Federighi announced that Steam VR was coming to the Mac, but nothing much has really happened in the past 3 years, and coincidentally, Valve announced just earlier this month that it was ending Steam VR support for Macs entirely, so that it could focus on Windows and Linux instead. Still, Apple has been trying to beef up its internal technology development group with people proficient in VR. Even now, if you look at their career site, there are a handful of open listings calling for people who have worked not just with augmented reality, but with virtual reality too. The company is looking for people who will ultimately, and I quote, shape and guide the next generation of interactive computing for our platform, end quote. The desire for VR experience is there, and while we can't be sure how many NextVR employees Apple is going to keep or is keeping now, the point is the company's VR efforts are almost certainly getting a shot in the arm. Like I said earlier though, no one knows exactly what Apple wants from NextVR, but there are a couple possibilities here. The most basic, and I guess if you're a fan of Occam's razor, the most likely, is that Apple just bought NextVR for its intellectual property. At the time the startup was acquired, it had 38 patents that dealt with everything from stereoscopic video processing and encoding to methods for VR content streaming to means of calibrating, quote, immersive content systems, unquote. As Apple continues to flesh out its future in wearable devices with things like those long-rumored AR glasses, these patents are going to be invaluable. But hey, maybe it's other stuff too. NextVR has plenty of experience, for example, building complicated VR-focused cameras. That expertise might come in handy for some of the teams inside Apple who are working on making better, more flexible camera systems. NextVR was also predominantly a VR content company, so perhaps Apple saw value in preserving some of NextVR's partnerships for future products. More than ever, Apple as a company relies on its services like iCloud and Apple Music subscriptions, App Store revenue, warranty fees, all of that to help grow its revenue. So it's not hard to imagine Apple pitching live virtual access to music and sporting events for a monthly fee. I'm not sure NextVR ever actually made that much money. As I recall, it failed to raise a Series C funding around 2 years ago and had to lay off a bunch of people. Still, if there's any company out there that could afford to burn money until people really bought into its vision, it's Apple. Long story short, the NextVR acquisition could be important to Apple in a lot of different ways. Now Apple just needs the right hardware to deliver on whatever its vision happens to be. And wouldn't you know it, a new report from Front Page Tech's John Prosser suggests that Apple's first AR headset, called Apple Glass, could make its debut as early as this September as a one more thing at Apple's flagship iPhone launch event. Prosser goes pretty heavy on the detail, and props to him for this tremendous scoop. He suggests that Apple Glass basically just looks like a regular pair of plastic glasses and will go on sale for $500 plus whatever the cost of getting prescription lenses is near the end of 2021 or early in 2022. Most important to this whole NextVR discussion is the fact that Apple Glass will reportedly have displays in each of its lenses. Now, Prosser didn't elaborate on whether those displays would fill the entirety of those lenses or if they just work like heads-up displays for quick interactions. If it's the latter, which I sort of strongly suspect to be the case, you're probably not going to be watching live VR basketball games on this thing. Still, Apple has also reportedly been working on at least one other headset that does incorporate VR as well as AR and uses really high-resolution screens. Think 8K, that was the last rumor that we really heard make the rounds. When the information published its scoop late last year, it claimed that this AR/VR headset would launch first, and that the kind of AR glasses that Prosser describes would follow about a year later. Maybe that's the case, still, maybe not. I mean, the world is a very different place now than when that story was published. We'll keep tracking these developments as they occur, but one thing is for sure, Apple's lineup of products and services is going to get wild pretty soon. We really appreciate your support. If you have any feedback, be sure to leave it in the comments or email me at v8engadget.com. And as always, thanks for being here with us. Thanks for letting me and my living room into your home. And thanks for joining me in the last video before I go crazy and probably shave my head.